I don't know who I am.
Can you remember anything?
Nothing. Not even my name.
Then you're coming home with me.
You can't prove anything. You paid them to kill me. This company belongs to me! Not after what you did.
Name your price and walk away. I never wanted his money. His father said that too.
You chose me before you knew me.
She found him the same morning she decided she was done. Done with the double shifts, done with Derek's careful tallies of what she owed him, done with the feeling that her own kindness had slowly become someone else's advantage. The man was sitting against the chain-link fence at the edge of Riverside Park at 6:04 a.m., barely upright, right shoulder, wrapped in what looked like a gas station shirt, face gray under 3 weeks of stubble. She almost walked past. She had been learning lately how to walk past things that hurt to look at. She didn't. He looked up when she stopped, and what stopped her wasn't pity. It was something in his eyes. He wasn't vacant. He was lost. There's a difference, and Nora Hayes had spent 8 years in an emergency room learning exactly what that difference looked like. Welcome to today's story. If you enjoy emotional drama and shocking twists, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more unforgettable stories. And before we begin, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. A few weeks before Nora Hayes found the man she would call Eli, her life had a shape she could still recognize, even if she wasn't sure she liked it anymore. She was 31, a triage nurse at Valley General, and she was good at her job in the way that certain people are good at managing other people's crises, efficiently, with steady hands, and with a private cost that never made it onto any official form. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building with thin walls and a parking lot that flooded every February. Her mother, Claire, lived 40 minutes south in a smaller apartment, recovering from a cardiac event that had happened 11 months ago and had not finished happening in any of the ways that mattered: the bills, the fatigue, the twice-weekly physical therapy. Nora covered what insurance didn't. Derek helped cover what Nora couldn't. That was the arrangement. It had seemed like care once. Now it felt like arithmetic. She was thinking about that arithmetic when she turned into Riverside Park on her walk home from the overnight shift, because she always cut through the park in the early mornings when the city was still quiet and the light was still gray, and the only people awake were dog walkers and whoever hadn't made it home. She was thinking about the number Derek had mentioned on the phone 2 nights ago, very casually, the way he always mentioned numbers, not as accusation, just as information, just as a reminder of what the current balance was. And she was thinking that she was tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. Then she saw the man by the fence. She crossed the grass toward him without fully deciding to. It was a reflex. She had a reflex for things that looked like emergencies, and this looked like one. Up close, she could see the shoulder more clearly. The shirt was tied around it in a rough sling, old blood at the edge, not actively bleeding, but not well. His breathing was even. He was watching her approach with a wariness that was not hostile, just careful. He was younger than the stubble made him look, late 30s maybe. He had the kind of face that would have been striking if it weren't so exhausted. "Can I look at your shoulder?" she said. He didn't answer right away. Not because he didn't understand. She could see him processing the question, choosing. "I'm a nurse," she added. "Off duty. You don't have to let me." "All right," he said. His voice was low and unused sounding. She crouched and unwrapped the makeshift sling carefully. The shoulder had been dislocated at some point recently reduced, she guessed, either by someone who knew what they were doing or by the man himself in some moment she didn't want to imagine. There were older bruises beneath the fresh ones. He had been surviving for more than a few days. "Do you know what happened?" she asked. "No," he said. And then, after a pause, "I don't know my name either." If that's the next question, she looked up at him. He met her eyes without apology. "That's a long time to not know something like that," she said. "Yes," he agreed. She noticed the ring, titanium band on his right hand, plain and heavy, with 2 letters engraved on the face. EC. He saw her looking at it and made a small movement, not aggressive, just protective. "You don't have to tell me whose it is," she said. "I just notice things." She rebandaged the shoulder with the small kit she kept in her bag, because old habits don't clock out when shifts end. She stood up. She looked at the park around them, at the pale morning sky, at the man by the fence who had 3 weeks of no name living behind him, and was watching her with eyes that were still clear even when everything else about him said broken. She said, "I have coffee and a couch, and I can at least put a proper dressing on that shoulder." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't know me?" "No," she said. "That's true, I don't." She shouldered her bag. "I'll call you Eli. For the E on the ring, since you don't have anything else right now. You can tell me to stop if it bothers you." He said, "Eli," like he was testing it. "That's fine." He let her help him stand. She didn't know it then, but it was the most consequential thing she had ever done before 7 in the morning. Derek was still asleep when she got home, and he was awake and already irritable when he walked out of her bedroom 40 minutes later to find a stranger sitting at her kitchen table with a freshly bandaged shoulder, wearing one of the old flannels she kept in the hall closet. Derek stopped in the kitchen doorway. He looked at the man. He looked at Nora. He looked at the man again. "What is this?" he said. "His name is Eli," Nora said. She was at the counter making eggs. He was hurt. "I brought him in. You brought a stranger home. I'm a nurse, Derek. You're off duty." She put a plate in front of Eli without looking at Derek. "Eat," she told Eli. Derek said her name in the specific tone he used when he wanted her to understand that something was serious. She recognized it. It was the same tone as the number. She turned from the counter. "He can stay on the couch until we figure out the next step," she said. "That's the end of the conversation right now." Derek looked at Eli. Eli had not reacted to any of this. He was sitting with his hands around the coffee mug, very still, looking at the table, but Nora had watched his face, and he had not tuned out. He was listening with the kind of attention that didn't show. "Do you have anything to say?" Derek said to Eli, pointedly. Eli looked up. He studied Derek for a moment with an expression that was impossible to read. "She decides," Eli said quietly. 2 words, not a challenge. Just a statement of fact, delivered with a steadiness that shouldn't have been possible from a man who didn't know his own name. Derek's expression shifted. It was brief, just a flicker, but Nora caught it. He hadn't expected that. He had expected confusion, or deference, or the easy collapse of someone with nothing to stand on. He hadn't gotten any of those things. Derek left for work without eating. Nora sat down across from Eli with her own coffee. The apartment was quiet. "Thank you," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure for what. Eli looked at her. "You didn't need my help with that." "No," she agreed, "but it was useful anyway." She watched him eat. He ate like a man who had not been sure about his next meal for some time. Not quickly, not gratefully, just carefully, without waste. There was something methodical in it. She filed that away with the ring and the clear eyes and the way he had said those 2 words. And she thought, "Whoever you are, Eli, you have not always been this." Outside, the morning traffic was starting up. Somewhere in the building, a neighbor's alarm was going off. The day was beginning, ordinary and indifferent, and Nora Hayes had no idea that the man across her kitchen table was going to change the shape of her life, or that she had already changed his. 3 days in, and Eli had not caused a single problem. This was something Nora kept waiting for, because she was a practical person, and she was not naive about what it meant to bring a stranger with no memory and no history into her home. She had a deadbolt and a neighbor with a large dog and a general policy of not doing foolish things. Bringing Eli home had felt like an exception, and she had been steeling herself for the moment the exception turned costly. It hadn't. He slept on the couch, without complaint, woke before she did, and had figured out by the 2nd morning where she kept the coffee. He folded his blanket every day with the precision of someone who had once been told to fold things a certain way and had never unlearned it. When the pipe under the kitchen sink started dripping, a problem that had been accumulating for 3 weeks, low on Nora's priority list, she came home from a shift to find it fixed. Not patched. Fixed. With a replacement connector he had apparently sourced from the hardware store 2 blocks away. "I had $7 in the change jar on the counter," she said. "I know," he said. "I left the receipt." She looked at him. He was at the kitchen table looking at a piece of paper. Her piece of paper, she realized. The billing dispute she'd been trying to parse for a month, the one from her mother's hospital stay, 17 pages of line items and denial codes and appeal windows she didn't have time to decode. "That's private," she said, but without real heat. "I know. I wasn't looking for personal information." He slid it toward her. He had written notes in the margin, her margins, which she didn't have the heart to be angry about because his handwriting was very clear. "There's an error in the facility fee calculation on page 4. The insurance adjustment was applied to the pre-negotiated rate instead of the billed amount. That's not their protocol. If you file a corrected appeal with the itemized breakdown on page 11, they'll have to recalculate." Nora picked up the page. She read the margin note. It was precise in a way that was not approximate. It referenced specific billing code logic that she had looked up once and given up on because the language was too dense. "How do you know this?" she said. Eli looked at his hands. "I don't know," he said. "It just looked wrong when I read it, like a document that had been structured incorrectly." She sat down. "Have you worked in insurance?" "I don't think so." He paused. It felt more like reading a contract, looking for where it doesn't hold. She filed that away next to the pipe, next to the folded blanket, next to the 2 words he had said to Derek. She was building a picture from the edges in, because the center was still missing. Derek came by that afternoon while Nora was on shift. She found out about it that evening when Eli told her, quietly and without drama, the way he told her most things. "He came to ask me to leave," Eli said. Nora set down her bag. "What did you say?" "I asked him what you owed him." She looked at him, and he told me a number. I asked if it was a loan. He said it wasn't exactly. Eli was looking at the table again, in that way he had of looking at things when he was working something out. "He said it was an investment in your future." His words. Nora's chest tightened. That's what he said. Then he said if I was still here next week, he'd stop being part of that investment. Eli looked up. I told him I didn't have any money to counter that. He laughed. I think he expected me to leave after that. "But you didn't." "It wasn't my decision to make," Eli said simply. "It's your apartment, and you hadn't asked me to go." Nora was quiet for a long moment. The apartment felt very small and very still. She thought about the number Derek had named, which was a real number, which represented a real amount of her mother's care, and she thought about the word investment and the way it sat in her stomach like something swallowed wrong. "I appreciate you telling me," she said. Eli nodded once and went back to looking at the table. Her mother came over for dinner that Thursday. Claire Hayes moved more carefully than she used to, but she moved, and she had strong opinions about pasta, and she looked at Eli with the frank curiosity of a woman who had stopped being embarrassed by her own questions in her early 60s. "You're the one she found at the park," Claire said, passing the bread. "Yes," Eli said. "Still don't know your name?" "Eli, for now, and you fixed the pipe." It was a straightforward repair. Claire considered him. "What do you remember? Anything?" Eli was quiet for a moment. "Noise," he said, "and a drop, like falling." "Were you in an accident?" "I think so, yes." Claire took the bread back. "You have good posture for someone who's been sleeping rough. That's a thing that goes, usually." She looked at Nora. "He's careful, Mom," Nora said. "I'm just noting it." Claire poured herself more water. Careful men usually have something worth protecting. Eli said nothing, but Nora watched his hand move, very briefly, to the ring on his right hand. A small unconscious gesture, a check, and then still. That night, after Claire left, Nora sat in the kitchen with her laptop open. She was looking at missing persons databases, medical case reports on dissociative amnesia, anything that might help her understand what Eli's situation actually was and what she was supposed to do about it. She had put off calling the police for reasons she couldn't entirely explain, partly because Eli had not given her any reason to be afraid, partly because bringing law enforcement into this felt like a door that she couldn't unopen once she opened it. She wanted to understand what she was working with first. She clicked through a news aggregator, local stories, business news, and there, in a results sidebar under Seattle, CEO missing, search called off for Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Capital Group. Presumed dead following Mountain Highway incident. The company has entered a period of organizational review. She skimmed it. Young CEO, highway accident. Vehicle found at the bottom of a ravine, no body recovered. Photograph: a man in a boardroom, dark suit, clean-shaved, 3 years younger, and 20 pounds heavier than the person asleep on her couch. She looked at the photo for a moment. Then her phone buzzed with a work notification, and she closed the tab and went to check it. She did not make the connection. Down the hall, Eli slept. And sometime before dawn, he said 2 words in a voice caught between sleep and waking, in a tone that was less like speaking and more like surfacing. Cole Capital. Then silence. Then the ordinary sounds of a building at 4 in the morning. In the kitchen, Nora's closed laptop sat on the table next to the corrected billing notes, the receipt for the pipe connector, and the $7 she hadn't spent. The boardroom at Cole Capital Group occupied the 42nd floor of a downtown Seattle tower, and Marcus Cole had spent the last 3 weeks making sure it felt like his. He had arrived early every morning since Ethan's disappearance. He spoke calmly in every meeting. He had taken the seat at the head of the conference table only twice, just twice, and only when there was no alternative, because Marcus understood something that most ambitious people didn't. The fastest way to look like you're taking power is to be seen not taking it. Patience was the only currency that didn't depreciate. 22 days since the mountain highway. No body, no signal from Ethan's phone. The rental SUV recovered at the bottom of a ravine on a stretch of road with no traffic cameras and no cell coverage for a 3-mile radius. The official position of the company was that the search was ongoing, that the board was holding, that everything was stable. Everything was, in fact, moving exactly where Marcus needed it to move. He was in a smaller meeting room, not the boardroom, the one with windows on 2 sides, and a better view when Patricia Ewan knocked and came in without waiting for an answer. Patricia was the CFO, had been with Cole Capital for 11 years, and had the specific quality of persons who kept detailed notes on everything and trusted almost no one, which made her invaluable and inconvenient in equal measure. The legal team filed the preliminary petition for declaration of absence this morning, she said. She sat down across from him. She had a folder. She always had a folder. I want to talk about the timeline. Of course, Marcus said. He smiled at her. I share your concerns. I haven't stated my concerns yet. Patricia. He set down his coffee. We all want Ethan back. That goes without saying, then say it. He said it. He said it with the right weight in his voice, the right pause before the word back, and he watched her watching him and he thought, she doesn't trust me, but she can't articulate why, and that's a gap I can work in. The board meeting is set for the end of the month, Patricia said. I'd like to delay the structural authority transfer until after that. The operational decisions can't wait that long. Which operational decisions? The Hargrove infrastructure deal, the Meridian refinancing. They have timelines, Patricia. I know their timelines. I signed off on both. She looked at him. I'd like Ethan's signature on the Hargrove documents before we move forward. Ethan is presumed I'm aware of what he's presumed, she said, and her voice was very quiet when she said it. I'd still like his signature. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Of course. We'll find another approach for the short-term operational needs. You're right to want the process followed correctly. She left. He watched the door close behind her and he thought, 6 more days. He had people he trusted with things he didn't put in writing. One of them called that afternoon from a number registered to a logistics company in Portland. She's on the 4th floor of a building in Eastlake, the man said. The nurse. She's been bringing him food from the deli on the corner. He's been there 3 days at least. Description. Matches what we had. Shoulders bandaged. He's not moving around much. Marcus looked out at the city. He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hand. He doesn't know who he is. Doesn't seem to. And the ring? Still on him. Our tracker isn't close enough to ping it, but she, the nurse, she hasn't moved him. He's not going anywhere on his own. Marcus thought about this. The tracker embedded in Ethan's ring was something Ethan had set up years ago. A private arrangement between Ethan and his head of security, Simon Park. Marcus had discovered it only because he had access to Ethan's personal calendar for one afternoon 3 months ago, when Ethan had asked him to reschedule a security briefing. He had seen 2 words. Ring, tracker. He had noted them and said nothing. He had also noted the name Simon Park and had made certain, in the weeks since the accident, that Simon's access to company resources was constrained. Not removed, that would be visible, just constrained. Slowed. Keep watching, Marcus said. I want to know if Simon Park comes anywhere near that building. He ended the call. On his desk was a draft of the Hargrove documents with a signature line that currently said Ethan W. Cole. In a few days, it would say Marcus A. Cole, acting CEO. Close. Very close. 4 floors above the Cole Capital boardroom, in a building in Eastlake, Simon Park sat in a rental car with a receiver unit on the dash and a laptop balanced on his knee. Simon had been doing this since day 3. Not officially, he had taken personal leave, told the HR office he had a family matter, and used his own money and his own time and his own considerable patience. Simon had been Ethan Cole's head of security for 7 years. He had watched Marcus Cole for 4 of those years the way a good security professional watches anything, from a distance, without letting himself be watched back. He did not know exactly what Marcus had done. He knew that the mountain highway route Ethan had taken that afternoon was a route Ethan used exactly twice a year, that no one should have known about it, and that Ethan had told him that morning he was going up to check on a property in person and didn't need a driver. The kind of casual, ordinary decision that someone could have fed Marcus without knowing why they were being asked. He had been mapping a radius from the last known location of the tracker. It was a slow search. The tracker was designed to ping no more than once every 6 hours, at extremely low power, to avoid being found by anyone who shouldn't be looking. It was also designed to be found by Simon specifically, if he was close enough. He had been getting closer for 5 days. The receiver on his dash showed a grid. Most of it was gray. In the middle of the grid was a single faint amber mark, 4 miles east of his current position. He had moved 3 times today. The mark had moved with him, or rather, it had stayed still, and he had gotten closer to it. He put the car in drive. 3 miles. 2. The amber mark held. He turned onto a residential street in Eastlake and pulled to the curb. He looked at the receiver. He looked at the building in front of him. Brick, 5 floors, lighted windows on the 3rd floor, where someone had left a curtain half open. The amber mark was steady. Simon sat very still for a moment. Then he reached for his phone and did not call anyone at Cole Capital. He called a number he kept separate from his work contacts in a different app under a name that meant nothing. He said, "I need you to stand by. I may have him." He put the phone away. He looked up at the lighted window on the 3rd floor. Ethan, he thought, if you're up there, stay exactly where you are. I'm coming. The argument with Derek happened while Nora was working a double, which meant she wasn't there for it, which meant she found out about it the way she found out about most things in her life lately. After the fact, through someone else's summary, with all the texture removed. Eli told her at the kitchen table when she got home at 10:30, in the same even tone he used for everything, as if he were reporting on a building maintenance issue rather than the most recent escalation in the slow collapse of her relationship of 2 years. Derek had arrived at 11 in the morning. He had a key. Nora had given it to him 14 months ago for emergencies, which he used mostly when she was away, and he wanted to make a point about being comfortable in the space. He had come in, found Eli at the kitchen table, reading one of Nora's old coursework texts on hospital billing compliance, and told him, with measured courtesy, that it was time to make other arrangements. Eli had said, "How much does she owe you?" Derek had not been ready for that question. Not because it was aggressive, it wasn't. It was quieter than that. It was the question of someone who had assessed the whole situation in a single frame and gone directly to the load-bearing element. "He gave me a number," Eli told her. "I asked if it was a loan. He said it was more of a partnership. I asked who drafted the partnership terms. He didn't answer that." Nora sat with her coat still on. "What did he say next?" "He said that if I was still here by next week, the partnership would end, that your mother's situation would become your situation alone to manage." A pause. He said it very politely. He usually does. I told him I didn't have resources to offer an alternative arrangement. He laughed. Eli looked at her steadily. "I don't think he was expecting me to treat it like a negotiation. He was expecting me to leave. But you didn't, no, because you hadn't asked me to. And because he started again. He was using your mother's care as collateral, against you." I don't think that was a recent development. Nora was quiet for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The building's hallway light flickered twice and steadied. No, she said finally. It wasn't. She stood up and hung her coat on the hook by the door. She went to the counter and filled a glass of water and stood there, drinking it, looking at the dark window above the sink. She was thinking about the number Derek had named, which she had been thinking about for weeks, as a debt, as an obligation, as a thing she owed, and she was now thinking about it as something else, as a handle, on her. When you said, "How much does she owe you?" she said, "What were you going to do with the answer?" "I don't know," Eli said honestly. I just knew it was the right question to ask. If you know the number, you can work with it. If you don't know the number, you're already working at a disadvantage. She turned around. He was watching her, not with sympathy exactly, more with the quality of someone paying very close attention to something that mattered. "Where did you learn to think like that?" she said. He looked at his hands. The ring caught the light. "I don't know," he said. "It's just how things seem to work. Money is usually just a claim someone made out loud before the other person thought to question it." She went to bed at midnight and lay there for an hour thinking about that sentence. It was the most useful thing anyone had said to her about money in 2 years. Derek did not come by the next day. He sent a text at 9 in the morning that said only, "Let me know when you've sorted things out." She read it and put her phone face down and went to make breakfast. Her mother called that afternoon, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that Claire said midway through the call, "Nora, I looked at the corrected billing appeal you sent me." A pause. "The notes in the margin. You didn't write those?" "No," Nora said. "Eli did." "Yes." A longer pause. Claire was quiet in the particular way she got quiet, when she was thinking something she wasn't sure how to say. "Nora," she said finally, "these notes cite the same specific billing code that the hospital's own compliance officer cited when I tried to appeal 2 years ago. The one they said was too technical to navigate without a specialist." "I know," Nora said. "Where does a man with no memory learn that?" "I don't know, Mom." There was silence on the line. Then Claire said, "He's careful again." The same word she had used Thursday, but with a different weight this time. Not observation. Something closer to certainty. Eli was at the kitchen table when she came back from her call. He had been there most of the afternoon, working on the appeal documentation with the statistic patience of someone who had done this kind of work before, building a case from its pieces, noting where the language shifted, where the logic didn't hold. He had created a 3-column structure on a legal pad. The original claim, the insurance response, the error. It was the kind of structure that belonged in a law firm or a boardroom, not on Nora's kitchen table. "You should get that submitted before the appeal window closes," he said without looking up. "They have a 45-day limit from the denial notice. You're at 38. "I know," she said. She sat down across from him. "Eli." He looked up. "Who are you?" she said, not unkindly. He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said, "but I thinks I was someone who spent a lot of time in rooms making decisions, the kind of rooms where the decisions affected a lot of people." He looked at the legal pad. "That doesn't narrow it down much." "No," she agreed, "but it's something." "It's something," he said. Derek called that night at 9. Nora answered because it had been 2 years, and she was not someone who avoided conversations she needed to have. He was measured at first, then less measured. He said she was making a choice that was going to cost her. He said she had always been naive about what care looked like from outside a hospital. He said the man in her apartment was a liability she didn't understand. She said, "I think we both know this has been coming for a while." He hung up. She sat with the quiet apartment around her for several minutes. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. She had expected shaking, or the hot prickling behind her eyes that usually preceded crying. Instead, there was just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain starting against the window and the sound of Eli in the spare room, very quietly turning a page. She was 31 years old, and she had just lost her financial safety net, and her boyfriend of 2 years in the span of a phone call, and her hands were steady. She filed that information away, the same way she filed everything. Then she went to make tea, because the next shift started at 6, and her mother's appeal had to be submitted by Thursday, and there was still work to do. Memory, Nora had learned in her nursing training, was not a filing system. It was more like a building after a flood, the structure mostly intact, the contents rearranged or ruined, some rooms sealed off entirely. Recovery was less about retrieval than about rebuilding access. The brain found workarounds. It left breadcrumbs in places the person hadn't thought to look. Eli's breadcrumbs were getting harder to ignore. It started with the coffee. She had left the morning news on in the background, financial segment, which she normally muted, and she came into the kitchen to find Eli standing in front of the counter, coffee in hand, completely still, listening to a report about a regional infrastructure fund. His face had the expression she had come to recognize as internal effort, the look of someone reaching for something just out of range. "You okay?" She said. "That fund," he said. "The structure they're describing. That's a wrong approach. You'd have better liquidity if you staged the capital calls over 18 months instead of front." He stopped, blinked. "I don't know why I said that. Do you know what a capital call is?" He thought about it. It's a demand on investors to contribute committed funds. He said it like reading from a text. It's standard in private equity. "Private equity," Nora repeated. "Yes." He set down his coffee. He looked at her with the same slight alarm he got every time one of these moments surfaced, because the knowing was always disconnected from the knowing how he knew. She didn't push it. She poured her own coffee and left the news on. The trigger 3 days later was more specific. She had received mail for a previous tenant. A parcel with a return label from a delivery company she didn't recognize. She set it by the door, and Eli picked it up to check the address, and he saw the company logo on the label. A minimalist double C mark in dark blue. He put it down slowly. "Do you recognize that logo?" Nora said. Yes, he was very still. "It's..." He stopped. "I can't get to it directly, but I know it. I know it from the inside, not from looking at it. From the inside meaning I've been on the other side of that logo, not as a customer." He looked at her. "I think I worked there, or somewhere connected to it." She pulled out her phone and searched. Double C logo, Seattle, private equity. The second result was Cole Capital Group. She turned the screen toward him. He looked at it for a long moment. Something moved through his face, not quite recognition, more like the sensation that comes just before recognition, the reaching. "Cole Capital." He said. "You've said that before," she said, "in your sleep, a few nights ago." He looked at her. "I said it in my sleep?" "Yeah," she kept her voice even. "Does it mean anything?" "I don't know," he said, "but something in my chest does something when I hear it." He paused. Not like fear. Like, he searched for the word, responsibility. She looked at the search result on her screen. The article was dated 3 weeks ago. Search for Cole Capital CEO called off. She looked at Eli. She looked at the article. She looked at the photograph, a boardroom photo, a man in a suit, years younger than the person standing in front of her, and a different version of his face in ways she catalogued without intending to. Same jaw, different weight. No beard. She had looked at this photo before. She hadn't been looking the right way. She almost said something. Then her phone buzzed, a work notification, and the moment passed the way moments do, and she put her phone in her pocket and went to get her keys and went to work. She did not mention the article to Eli. She told herself it was because she wasn't sure, that the photo was old and the resemblance might be coincidence, that she didn't want to give him something that turned out to be wrong. These were all true. There was also a thing she didn't let herself say directly, which was that she wasn't sure she was ready for what happened if she was right. The knock on her door came on a Wednesday, in the early afternoon. She answered it because she was not on shift until 4. The man at her door was around 40, wearing a jacket that was one quality tier above what you wore for a casual visit, and he had the look of someone who had prepared a story and was ready to deliver it. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "I'm looking for my brother. He's been missing for a few weeks. I have reason to believe he might have been in this area." He showed her a photo on his phone. "Have you seen anyone matching this description?" The photo showed a man. She looked at it and then she went still, because the photo matched her house guest in ways she hadn't assembled in her own mind yet, but which her eyes assembled immediately. "Hold on," she said. She went to the hallway and called for Eli. He came out of the spare room. He saw the man at the door. She watched his face very carefully because she was watching for recognition, for the loosening that comes when you see someone familiar. She didn't see that. She saw something else, the subtle shift of someone whose body has understood something before the mind has translated it. Not a tensing, exactly. More like the way a door closes, quiet, deliberate, purposeful. "That's not my brother," Eli said. He said it without hesitation and without explanation. The man at the door looked at him for a fraction of a second too long, not confused, Nora thought later. Assessed. "I'm sorry," the man said. "You're right. I apologize for the interruption." And he left. She closed the door. She turned around. Eli was looking at the closed door with the same expression. "Do you know him?" she said. "No, but I don't like him." She thought about that for a long time after he went back to the spare room. The man hadn't given a name, hadn't asked for any information beyond what she'd offered with her silence. And when Eli had said, "That's not my brother," the man hadn't pushed back, hadn't said, "Are you sure?" Hadn't done any of the things a genuinely confused person looking for a genuinely missing brother would have done. She went to her laptop and opened the Cole Capital article again. She looked at the photograph for 3 full minutes. Then she looked up Simon Park, Cole Capital. Because his name had been in the article as someone unavailable for comment, and the image search returned a photo of a Korean-American man in his mid-40s in a security badge photo. She didn't know that Simon Park's receiver was parked 2 miles from her building. She didn't know that the man who had just left her doorway had sent a text message before he reached the elevator. "He's there. Confirmed." Doesn't know who he is. She didn't know any of that. She only knew that Eli was in the spare room, and that the man who had just been at her door had something wrong about him, and that the Cole Capital search had been called off 3 weeks ago, and that Eli had said in his sleep the words Cole Capital, and that the photo in the article was old, and that the difference between that man in the photo and the man in her spare room was mostly time and hunger and loss. She closed the laptop. She went to the spare room door and knocked. "Yeah," Eli said. "I'm going to make dinner in about an hour," she said. "Come out when you're ready." A pause. "All right." She went back to the kitchen. Somewhere in the city, a receiver beeped, and Simon Park looked at his screen and saw the amber mark had not moved, getting closer. 2 miles. Simon Park buzzed Nora's apartment at 7:14 on a Thursday evening, while she was standing at the stove making soup and Eli was at the kitchen table with a library book he had requested on contract law. Not for any conscious reason, he'd said, just because it felt like territory he knew. She almost didn't answer. The intercom had been misbehaving for a month, producing a sound like something being slowly torn whenever anyone used it, and half the time the person at the door gave up before she could respond. But she pressed the button and said yes, and the voice on the other end was calm and careful. "My name is Simon Park," the voice said. "I work in security. I'm looking for someone who may be living in your building. I have a photograph of a personal item he carries. I believe I have something that belongs to him." She was still for a moment. Then she pressed the door release. She met him at the top of the stairwell. He was exactly the age and face from the image search she had done 2 days ago. He was holding a tablet with a photograph on the screen, a photograph of a signet ring, titanium, 2 letters on the face. EC, she heard Eli come out of the kitchen behind her. She stepped aside. Simon saw Eli and went entirely still. Just for a moment, just one beat, before something in his face broke open in a way that Nora was not prepared for. It was relief so total it looked like it hurt. The kind of relief that has been held in reserve for weeks, because letting it out before you had certainty would have been unbearable. "Ethan," Simon said. It was not a question. Eli, Ethan, went very still. Nora watched from 2 steps away with the knowledge of a triage nurse, which meant she was watching not the visible event but its edges. His breathing, his hands, the line of his shoulders, the specific quality of the stillness. The word hit him differently than anything had. Not like the logo, not like the capital call structure, not like Cole Capital said in his sleep. This was a key hitting a lock that had been there all along, and she could see it, the way you can see the moment when a muscle unseizes. He sat down on the top step of the stairwell. He didn't fall. It was deliberate, just a lowering, because standing had become too much to ask of his legs right then. Simon sat down next to him without being asked, without ceremony. They were both on the floor of a stairwell that smelled like other people's cooking, and neither of them seemed to think this was strange. Nora sat on the step below them and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that would improve on the silence. It took 20 minutes. Not continuous talking, more like pieces. Simon would say something, or say a name, and Ethan would sit with it, and then another piece would arrive. She could see it happening, the way she could sometimes see the moment a patient who had been in shock began to come back into their body. There was no single instant. It was accumulative, and then it was done. When Ethan stood up, he was different. Not in any way she could have described to someone who hadn't watched the previous 20 minutes, but she had, and she could see it. He was more contained. The slight quality of uncertainty he'd carried in his posture since the park, the way he'd always seemed to be calculating where the boundaries of himself were, that was gone. He knew where he was. He knew what he was standing on. He also looked tired in a way that was specific and new. The tiredness of someone who has just taken delivery of a weight they had been carrying without knowing they were carrying it. He looked at Nora. "I owe you a real explanation," he said. "You don't owe me anything," she said, "but I'd like one anyway." They went back into the apartment. Simon did not sit down immediately. He stood by the window with his phone in his hand, monitoring something, she guessed, and Ethan sat across from her and told her in 10 minutes what the situation was, in the same way he'd analyzed her mother's billing paperwork, cleanly, without editorializing, beginning with what was material. His name was Ethan Whitfield Cole. He was CEO of Cole Capital Group. 25 days ago, on his way to inspect a property outside the city, his vehicle had been forced off the mountain highway by a 2-man crew working for hire. He had survived the drop, lost consciousness, and had been in severe dissociative amnesia since he regained physical stability, 3 weeks of survival on instinct, and the knowledge that the ring on his finger mattered even though he didn't know why. The person who had hired the crew was his first cousin Marcus, who had been positioning himself for the acting CEO role since Ethan had dismissed him from 2 strategic decisions Marcus believed he was entitled to be part of. He said all of this without anger. As information. "The board has a vote scheduled," he said. "Marcus has been running a quiet campaign to get himself installed as permanent acting CEO. He's been telling them the organizational review needs to resolve before I can come back, and that resolution requires him to be formally in authority." He looked at the window where Simon was still watching his phone. "How long until he moves the vote?" Simon didn't turn around. Patricia Ewan has been holding him off. But he called an emergency session this morning. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Ethan looked at the clock on Nora's kitchen wall. It was 7:41 p.m. 12 hours, he said. Just under. Nora had been quiet through all of this. She had been watching Ethan the way she watched everything, with the specific attention that is not just listening to the words, but reading the space between them. She said, "Are you hungry?" He looked at her. She could see that the question surprised him, which she had calculated. When someone has just picked up a very heavy thing, sometimes the kindest intervention is to make them set it down for 12 minutes and eat something. "Yes," he said. "Then eat first," she said. "You can call Patricia from the kitchen." He almost laughed. It was a short sound, abbreviated, but it was real. Simon did turn around then, and he looked at Nora with an expression she could not quite classify, something between recognition and reassessment. Ethan called Patricia Ewan at 8:02 p.m. He used Nora's phone because his had been destroyed in the drop, and Simon's line was on Cole Capital infrastructure that Marcus could monitor. Patricia picked up on the second ring. Ethan said, "Patricia." "It's Ethan." There was a silence on the line that lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then Patricia Ewan said, in a voice that was very quiet and very controlled, "Oh my God." He told her to hold the vote. She told him Marcus had called the emergency session for 8 a.m. and had already secured 4 of the 7 board votes. 8 a.m., 12 hours. 4 votes to 3. Outside, in a car parked on the street opposite Nora's building, a man sent a text message. 3 blocks away, in a building that had nothing to do with any of this, Marcus Cole's phone buzzed. He read the message. He set the phone face down. He thought for a moment. Then he made a call. Nora did not hear it. Ethan did not hear it. Simon Park, who had a receiver for many things but not yet for Marcus's personal cell, did not hear it. But the call was made, and the thing it set in motion had already started by the time Ethan looked at Nora across her kitchen table and said quietly, 9 hours. She looked back at him. I know. Thank you for. He stopped. You don't have to, she said. He didn't finish the sentence, but he looked at her in a way that said it anyway. Cole Capital's legal team arrived at Nora's apartment at midnight. 2 attorneys, a paralegal, and a forensic accountant Simon had been working with for 3 weeks. They came separately, different cars, nothing that looked like a convoy. The apartment was small for 6 people, but no one commented on it. They worked on Nora's kitchen table and on the floor of the living room with laptops and printed files, and Eli, Ethan, sat at the center of it and became, over the course of 2 hours, someone Nora had only partially anticipated. She had understood, in the abstract, that the man she knew as Eli was not the same man he had been before the accident. She had watched competence surface in him in fragments, the pipe, the billing analysis, the way he read people, but those had been fragments. What she watched now was the person those fragments came from. Someone who processed information quickly, made decisions cleanly, and distributed responsibility without drama. He spoke less than anyone else in the room, and the room organized itself around what he said. She made coffee at 2 in the morning for people who were too focused to notice they were drinking it. She was not part of the operation. She understood this. She was in her own apartment, and she was not part of anything that was happening in it, and she found that she didn't mind. She sat on the couch with her own coffee and watched, and what she thought was, he was always in there. At 4 a.m., Simon said, "We have a problem." The man Marcus had sent to Nora's door, the one who had asked about a missing brother, had confirmed Ethan's location and identity to Marcus before Ethan called Patricia. Marcus had used that window 12 hours ago, while Ethan was still on Nora's couch, working through the pieces of himself. Marcus had begun preparing a contingency. Not a vote delay, a challenge to Ethan's legal competency. He's going to bring a psychiatrist into the board meeting, Simon said. Someone who'll testify that a CEO who has been living as an amnesiac for 25 days cannot be presumed to be operating with full executive capacity. The room was quiet. Ethan looked at his attorneys. What's the exposure? It's a delay tactic, not a permanent bar, the senior attorney, a woman named Reston, said. But it could push the board into a holding pattern for 30 to 60 days while a competency evaluation is conducted. In that time, Marcus could finalize the Hargrove transfer with acting authority and create facts on the ground that are very difficult to unwind. What beats it? Ethan said. Reston said, walking in there and being exactly what you are, not arguing competency, demonstrating it, and the evidence against Marcus. That too. Ethan thought for a moment. Simon, the file. Simon opened a folder on his laptop and turned it toward the room. It was orderly and devastating. Telephone records from the 48 hours before the accident. Money transfers from an account in Marcus's name to a shell company registered in Delaware. A payment trail that connected that company to the 2 men who had been in the vehicle that ran Ethan's SUV off the road. One of those men was now in a facility in Portland. Simon had been in contact with him through an intermediary. He had agreed to provide a signed statement. The forensic accountant said, "The transfers are unambiguous. This isn't circumstantial." Then we go in at 6:30, Ethan said, before Marcus expects us. He looked across the room at Nora. She was still on the couch. She had been watching everything, and when he looked at her, she didn't look away. He said, "You can log into this from your phone. I want you to see it." She said, "Okay." She was not sure why he wanted her to see it. She thought maybe it was because she was the only person in the room who had known him before he knew himself, and that meant something to him that was difficult to say directly. He didn't say it directly. He just gave her the video call link and went back to work. Cole Capital Group occupied the 42nd floor, and Marcus Cole arrived at 7:15, which was 45 minutes before the board session, and exactly 15 minutes after Ethan walked off the elevator. Marcus came through the boardroom door and stopped. The board was already seated. Patricia Yoon was at the far end of the table, and she was the only one who did not look surprised, because she had been told at 4 in the morning to come early. The other 6 members looked between Marcus and Ethan with the specific expression of people who have been told a clear story for 3 weeks and are now being shown a different true story and need time to adjust. Marcus recovered quickly. He was very good at recovery. "Ethan," he said, and he put warmth in it. "Thank God. We've been looking—" "Sit down, Marcus," Ethan said. It was the same tone as the 2 words Nora had heard him say to Derek in her kitchen. Quiet, without theatrics, simply the assessment of a situation by someone who has already understood it. Marcus sat down. On the boardroom screen, Ethan opened a digital file. He didn't speak for the first 4 minutes. He let the evidence speak, which was better. Call records with timestamps, the Delaware Shell Company's registration documents, money transfers, the statement from the man in Portland. The psychiatrist Marcus had arranged never appeared. Nora heard later that his assistant had called to cancel at 7:40 a.m., 10 minutes into the presentation, which meant Marcus had canceled him rather than allow him to walk into a room where everything had already been laid out. Patricia called the vote at 8:18. 7 board members. Ethan made 7 because he held a seat. Marcus made 8, but Marcus had been suspended as of 6 minutes ago when the board voted, and suspended board members don't vote on their own suspensions. The count was 7-0. Ethan Cole confirmed as CEO. Marcus suspended pending transfer of the evidence file to the Seattle Police Department. The Hargrove documents were pulled from their current route and placed back on Patricia's desk. Marcus stood up when it was done. He was still composed. He looked at Ethan and said, "This isn't over." Ethan said, "It is." Marcus was escorted out by building security. Not by Cole Capital Security, because Simon Park was 2 blocks away, and the building's own team had been briefed. In Nora's apartment, on the small screen of her phone, she watched the moment Marcus left the room. She was in her nurse's scrubs because she had a shift starting in an hour, and life did not stop for corporate wars, and she was sitting on her couch in her scrubs, watching a boardroom on her phone as though this were a normal thing to do before work. Ethan looked directly into the boardroom camera. She realized, too late to adjust her expression, that he had known the camera angle and had known she would be there on the other side of it. He gave a very slight nod. Then his legal team surrounded him and the feed cut. She sat there for a moment with her phone in her hand and the blank screen. On the table beside her, Eli's coffee mug from this morning, still in the same place it had been for hours. The world had completely rearranged itself since she'd made that coffee, and the mug was right where she'd left it. She picked it up and washed it, because her shift started in 53 minutes and she still had to eat something, and she was, above everything else, a practical person. 2 days later, Ethan texted her. The message said, "Can I come by?" She sent back, "I'll make coffee." He arrived alone. No car service she could see, no security hovering at the building entrance. He knocked instead of buzzing, which meant someone had let him in through the main door, and when she opened the apartment door, he was standing in the hallway in a jacket she had not seen before. Clean, fitted, the kind of jacket that cost what she made in 2 shifts, and he looked, for the first time, like the person in the photograph. She moved back to let him in. He came in and she handed him a mug, and he sat at the same chair at the kitchen table, the one he had been sitting in for more than 3 weeks, and the combined strangeness and familiarity of that was something she decided not to look at directly. "How are things at the company?" she said. "Moving," he said. "Patricia has been managing the board communication. The legal team has the file in order for the prosecution. The Hargrove deal is back on the correct track." He wrapped both hands around the mug. "It's all recoverable." "And Marcus?" "He was charged this morning." No satisfaction in his voice, just information. "The man from Portland gave full testimony. It's documented, it'll go to trial." She nodded. She looked at her coffee. "The man who came to my door," she said, "the one who asked about his brother, one of Marcus's people. He confirmed to Marcus that you were sheltering me before Simon arrived." He looked at her. "You might have some difficulty from that going forward." I want to make sure. I'm fine, she said. Nora, I'm fine. I can manage what comes with my name in a situation. She met his eyes. That's not the first time my name has been in a situation. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I know. His grandmother wanted to meet her. He said this carefully, in a way that suggested he was prepared for her to refuse, which made her more inclined to accept. Helen Cole lived 30 minutes north of the city in a house that had been built for a different scale of living than Nora was accustomed to. Long driveways and ceilings that required scaffolding to clean and rooms whose purpose was to convey that other rooms existed. Ethan introduced them in a sitting room that faced a garden, and his grandmother sat very straight in a chair that had probably been chosen for exactly that effect. Helen Cole was 78 years old and had the eyes of someone who had outlasted multiple versions of people trying to take things from her. She looked at Nora for a long time without speaking, which Nora recognized as a specific kind of interview. You work in emergency medicine, Helen said. Tridge, Nora said. Valley, 8 years. Yes, and you found Ethan in a park. Yes, and you brought him home. Yes. Why? Nora considered the question. She could have said because he was hurt, or because I'm a nurse, both of which were true and neither of which was the complete answer. Because he was lost in a specific way, she said. Not confused. Lost, I know the difference. Helen looked at her. Then she reached into the jacket she was wearing, an elegant thing, charcoal gray, and produced a folded piece of paper, which she set on the table between them. That's a certified check, Hellenson said. It's made out to you. It's enough to cover your mother's medical expenses fully and to provide you with a reasonable transition if you choose to move to a different position. I'm offering it because you have been in a difficult situation through no fault of your own, and because I believe in handling these things cleanly. Nora looked at the check. She did not pick it up. It's also, Helen continued, with perfect composure, an offer to step away from my grandson's life without complications. The room was quiet. From somewhere in the house came the sound of a clock. Nora looked at the check for another moment. Then she pushed it gently back across the table toward Helen. I appreciate the offer, she said. I didn't ask for Ethan's help with my mother's bills when he was Eli and didn't have anything. I'm not going to take money now to leave him. That would make me exactly the kind of person you're trying to protect him from. Helen looked at her. The expression on her face was not warm, not cold. It was the expression of a woman recalibrating. My son, she said, after a long pause. Ethan's father. He used to say something similar, in exact that tone. She picked up the check. She folded it and put it back in her pocket. He was usually right. She did not say anything else, but she refilled Nora's coffee cup without being asked, which Nora understood, given everything she had watched in the past hour, was its own kind of statement. Ethan was waiting by the car. He looked at Nora when she came out. How was it? He said. She offered me money to leave you alone, Nora said. He was quiet for a moment, and I gave it back. He looked at her with an expression that was difficult to read, not because it was complicated, but because it was very simple, and she wasn't sure she trusted herself to interpret simple things where Ethan Cole was concerned. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, she said. I did it because it was right. Not for you, he said. I know. That's why I'm thanking you. Derek surfaced a week later. A text saw the news. Impressive. Hope you're okay. She read it once and did not reply. She found out later, from Simon, who had been thorough, that Derek had been a loose contact of the man Marcus had sent to her door. Not a knowing participant, Simon said. More likely, Derek had mentioned, in an ordinary conversation with someone he barely knew, that his girlfriend had taken in a homeless man and the information had traveled. The kind of careless damage that happens when someone treats other people's lives as material for conversation. She blocked Derek's number. Her mother called on a Friday. Baby, Claire said. I looked you up. Mom, Nora said. You're in the business section, I know. You look very calm in the photograph. It was taken before I was aware there was a photograph being taken. Claire was quiet for a moment. Then I told you he was careful. And Nora laughed, really laughed, the kind that catches you before you can manage it, and held the phone against her chest for a second. The billing appeal went through. $14,000, refunded. The check arrived in her mother's name. Nora had not asked Ethan to intervene on the appeal itself. She had submitted it herself with the notes Eli had made on the legal pad before she had known who Eli was. It had worked on its own merits. Ethan pointed this out when she mentioned it. "I didn't do that," he said. "You did. Eli did the notes. You submitted them. You did it." She thought about that for a while. 6 months after the morning she had walked through Riverside Park and stopped at a chain link fence, Nora Hayes was still a triage nurse at Valley General. This was a choice. Ethan had not offered her anything, and she had not asked. He was careful about the difference between what he could give and what she had asked for, which was one of the things she had learned about him in the months that the world had gone on being the world, after all the drama of it. Marcus Cole went to trial. The ambush crew testified. The forensic accounting held. The verdict came in a Tuesday, which was a workday for Nora, and she followed the updates on her phone between patients and did not cry in the break room, though she had a moment in the supply closet at 2:15 where she stood with her hand against the cold metal shelf and breathed because it was done. It was done, and no one was coming to fix it after the fact or undo it, and the thing that had been put in motion on a mountain highway to get rid of a man who had not deserved to be gotten rid of was now finally accounted for. She texted Ethan. "Done," he sent back. "I know. Thank you." She put her phone away and went back to work. Derek's role was small but documented. He had mentioned Nora's houseguest in a conversation with one of Marcus's peripheral contacts, a man Derek knew vaguely from a real estate overlap, and the information had been passed along. Not intentional harm, not deliberate. Just carelessness with something that belonged to someone else, which, Nora thought, was not entirely different from how he had treated most things. The contact was interviewed by the prosecution and declined to pursue Derek further. Nora did not pursue it either. She had already made her peace with what Derek was. It was not satisfying in any dramatic way. It was just clear. Ethan came to Claire's apartment once with Nora for dinner. Claire made the pasta she always made and set the table with the good plates she only used for people she had decided mattered. She asked Ethan direct questions for 2 hours, and he answered them all without deflecting, which was the only currency Claire had ever recognized as genuine. When they left, Claire held Nora on the doorstep for a moment longer than a goodbye and said very quietly, "You picked right, baby." "I don't say that often," Nora said. "You've been saying it since Thursday morning in my kitchen." "I wanted to be sure," Claire said. They had dinner twice a week. Not always at the same place, sometimes at the apartment, sometimes somewhere that had nothing to do with either of their professional lives. They did not call what they were doing anything, because neither of them seemed to need a word for it, and the absence of a word felt like honesty rather than omission. Ethan asked her once, not pressingly, just with real curiosity, what she wanted. Not from the company, not from him, not from the situation. From her life, in the longer shape of it. She thought about it for a real amount of time, which he waited for without filling. "I want my mother to be okay," she said. "I want to keep being good at my job. I want to know that what I do in a day matters at the end of it." She paused. "I want to not be afraid of the size of my own life." He was quiet for a moment. "What does that mean?" "It means I've spent a long time making myself small because it was easier to manage," she said. "And I'm done with that." He said, "Okay," she said. "That's it?" "Okay." "Yes," he said. "I'm not going to tell you what your life should be." He looked at her, being to be in it. However that looks, she thought about that for a long time after he left. She thought about it on the walk to work and on the walk home, and in the hour before sleep when the thoughts that had been waiting all day finally had space. She had spent 2 years with a man who kept a running total of what she owed him. She had spent 3 weeks with a man who had nothing and had spent at that time trying to figure out how to be useful to her anyway. The contrast was not lost on her. It was, in fact, the clearest thing she had seen in years. On a morning in October, she walked home through Riverside Park after an overnight shift. The air was cold and wet and the leaves had come down. And the park was quieter than usual, just the sound of water somewhere and the distant traffic of the city waking up. She walked the same path she had walked that first morning. At the chain link fence at the edge of the park, she stopped. Not because anything was there. Because she was marking the place. Not with grief, not with sentiment exactly, just with the same clear attention she gave to everything she decided to carry forward. Then she kept walking. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Good morning. Coffee?" She didn't answer right away. She walked another half block to the place where the park opened onto the street and the light was coming in at a low angle, and it turned everything briefly gold. Then she wrote back, "Give me 20 minutes." She put her phone in her pocket. She walked home. She had not taken the money. She had not taken the easy version. She had not walked past the thing at the fence that hurt to look at, and she had not made herself small to fit inside someone else's accounting of her worth. And the life that was left after all of that was not simple, and it was not finished, and it was very much hers. That was enough. That was more than enough. If you're wondering what you would have done, whether you would have stopped that morning or walked past, I'd love to know. Leave it in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, the next one might too. In the years that followed, people in Hollow Pine grew accustomed to the sight of two women at Renner's Landing, one who could not speak and one who had finally learned to listen. They worked together through the seasons in the wordless partnership they had built, each knowing what the other needed without being told. The way people who have worked closely for a long time learn to move around each other without collision. There was no ceremony to how it happened. It was simply the daily practice of a place that asked to be kept. There were hard years. The kind of work the landing asked for does not get easier with telling. There was a spring the river came up higher than anyone living had seen it, higher than the old flood marks painted on the boathouse wall, higher than the line Silas had marked in the ledger in 1972 with a notation about the big water. The lower dock went under in one night, and 3 of the life rings went with it, and the current took a section of the bank that Silas had reinforced with river stones 40 years ago, as if it had been waiting all that time to reclaim it. Wren would not come in until she was sure no one was out in the water. She stood at the edge of the landing in the rain for hours, watching, one hand on the lamppost, until the water receded enough that she could be certain. And there was a winter a boy went under at the old eddy, the same eddy Silas had pulled the Pruitt boy from in 1981, and this time was different. He went down in the afternoon when the light was wrong and the current was high from the week's rain. Della heard about it that evening. She drove to the family's house. She sat with the mother for 2 hours and said almost nothing, which was what the woman needed. That night she went to the ledger. She took the pen. She wrote the boy's name in the same careful way. Silas had written the 7 entries that ended with the word lost, not because it made anything better, but because to leave it out would have been a second drowning, and Silas Renner had not let the river have anyone twice, and she would not either. She had learned what those 7 entries had cost him, those 7 times the word went down in his careful square hand. She had understood it abstractly from the ledgers. Now she understood it another way. She went to the funeral. She kept the lamp lit that night as she kept it every night, because the night the lamp is dark is the night you cannot forgive yourself. But there were more of the other kind, and those were the ones that kept the record worth keeping. Young Silas Pruitt, Dale's boy, who had grown from the quiet teenager, who'd helped with the dock framing into a strong, serious man, came down regularly. He had learned to swim at the landing, in the safe bend above the old eddy, where the current ran shallow and slow. He had learned to read the water from Wren, who had learned it from Silas, and the knowledge had passed through them the way the river passes, through the same channel year after year. One flood night in early April, he swam out twice into water no sensible person would enter. The first time he brought back a woman who had been swept from the low crossing. The second time he went back for someone else and came back alone. The water was too fast and too cold, and the dark was too deep, and he had to come back without them. He came into the boathouse soaking and shaking and sat at the table where Della was waiting. She pushed the ledger toward him. He took the pen with a hand too unsteady to keep a line straight and wrote 2 names, the one he had saved and the one he had not. Della did not correct the crooked letters or the unsteady line. "That's the truest line in the book," she told him. Lacey's daughter Renee had begun coming to the landing when she was old enough to be useful. A girl of 18 when she serious-faced and quick with her hands, who learned to sew life rings from Ren and Della the way Della had learned to sew everything. By watching carefully, by doing it wrong the first time, and by understanding that the quality of the work was not about showing off but about whether it held when it was needed. The set of rings Renee finished in her second year were so well made that Della kept one hanging on the boathouse wall the way another woman might frame a diploma. She didn't tell Renee that. She just left it there, where Renee could see it when she worked. 3 women of 3 generations sat mending life rings under the storm lantern through the autumn afternoons. Della, Ren, and Renee, the needle going up and down in a silence that was not empty but full, the way the landing itself had always been full of something that didn't have a name. The landing an appraiser had recorded as worth 0 became a place the whole town came to, not to buy or sell anything, but only to belong to something larger than themselves. People left things on the post the way they had left quarters on Silas's grave. A jar of preserves, a coil of good rope, a child's drawing of a boat and a lamp taped to the wood with electrical tape that came loose in the rain and had to be replaced, and was replaced, because the drawing was the kind of thing you replace rather than throw away. No one organized any of this. It simply happened the way water finds the low place, the way kindness, once it is shown where the channel runs, keeps running there. Della Renner lived many more years beside that river. When she was old and her hands could no longer row, she sat at the edge of the landing in the afternoons and watched Ren carry people across. Ren had become what Silas had always been, the person the river knew, the person who understood its moods and its dangers and its particular kindnesses. She had grown into the landing the way a tree grows into the bank, her roots so deep and so old that the bank had shaped itself around her. Ren taught others as she herself had been taught. She taught with her hands, not with words, which had always been the best way to teach the things that mattered. The knowledge passed from person to person like the current passes downstream, changing shape with the terrain but never stopping. The account that had once held only 164 never grew rich. Della was never rich. But she had come to understand, in the long years of keeping the record, something that the man in the polished black pickup would never understand. A legacy is not what we own. A piece of land can be appraised at 0. A ferry landing can rot. A bank account can drain down to loose change. But there are things no appraiser can measure, no power of condemnation can take, no number can buy. A name written down so it will not be forgotten. A hand reached out in the dark. A lamp lit every night for a stranger you will never meet. Silas Renner had left his wife a river and a set of ledgers full of people's umstisms. It had taken his death for her to finally read them. But once she had read them, she had never stopped. And that, in the end, is all that kindness asks of us. Not wealth, not thanks. Only that we keep a place on the page for the next name. Only that we keep the lamp burning. Keep the lamp lit. No one crosses alone. If this story stayed with you, if you think Silas measured things the right way, tell us in the comments. And if you know someone who lights a lamp for others without asking for anything in return, this one is for them.